Hi everybody, thanks for joining me. Today's video has been a long time in the making. It should have been fairly quick to do, but as I dug into the subject, I found a few anomalies that I needed to check with manufacturers on. So apologies for the delay, hopefully it's not too late, because today we're going to talk about battery care on e-bikes. My main emphasis is going to be on e-bikes that can't have the batteries removed for charging, because these present some more challenges. However, this is relevant even when we're talking about batteries that can be removed. There are certain things I'll mention that do affect those batteries, so it's worth sticking with this video just in case you can pick up a few tips. There's no doubt about it that lithium-ion batteries have created a revolution, certainly in cycling and in fact in most battery operated equipment. It gives a great deal of output for its size. The output from a lithium ion battery is much greater than some of the older styles like NiCad and so on. One of the most important things is that we can recharge that battery from any discharge state, and it's not going to create a memory such as the old NiCad batteries used to. There are three main areas that we'll talk about today, and they are temperature, charge time and storage. We'll start with temperature because temperature is something that can cause damage to your battery, so it's important that we understand the effects of temperature on our battery and those areas of temperature that can cause damage. And within temperature there are two main aspects, and that's discharging the battery, i.e. when we're riding it, and also charging the battery. And it's the former, discharging the battery, where I found the most discrepancy between information being given to us, the owners. Everything I'm going to explain today is contained in your user manual, so there's no reason why you wouldn't know this, but I know we don't always read manuals or we don't always understand them. And this is the case, I think, with the manuals that I've been reading, because there are some inconsistencies. For example, with my Ribble, the instructions told me not to discharge between minus 15 degrees C and 50 degrees C. So plenty of latitude there. But when I looked at the manufacturer's site, Mahle, they were stating 0 degrees C to 38 degrees C. Now that's quite a worry, because whereas we might not choose to go out in 0 degrees, it could happen while we're on a ride, or it could be that we're coming home after a long day's work and the temperature has dropped. So I needed to find out a bit more. So I then looked at the information provided by Panasonic, who manufacture the batteries for the X35 system. And interestingly, Panasonic say that you shouldn't discharge the battery in temperatures below minus 10 and 60 degrees C. So who do we believe? Who do we take notice of? Well, I would say that you have to take notice of the bike supplier, because if you do have a warranty issue and they try to say it's down to riding in the cold, then you've got some comeback on there. Quite why the Mahle information is so much different to Panasonic and indeed Ribble, I don't really understand. The only thing I can think of is that it's this phenomena that I've come across before in other aspects of life, where a manufacturer sets a safety parameter, and further down the line the next supplier decides they'll add their own safety margin, and of course then the end user adds their safety margin, and before you know it you've got an unusable product. The good news is that using the bike in low temperatures won't cause any problem at all. What it will do is reduce the amount that you get out of a battery in terms of distance. So for example, if you're commuting and maybe you just charge up once a week, you might have to charge up midweek. So it's a good idea to keep on top of how much charge you've got left. But as I say, it's not going to cause any damage to the battery. Where temperature will cause a problem though is when you're charging the battery. And this is where everybody seems to agree, at least on the lower figure. Panasonic, Mahle, Ribble all state that you mustn't charge the battery at temperatures below 10 degrees C. Of course, that can be a problem certainly anywhere in the UK, for example, where the temperature is below 10 degrees C for probably 5-6 months of the year. So what can we do? Does it mean we can't use our bike during these conditions? Well, no, fortunately it doesn't. But you do have to manage the situation a bit more carefully. We need to understand that batteries do generate heat when they're being used. And we can use this to our advantage. We can use the e-bike motion app to look at the temperature of the battery. And for example, here I've come in from a ride. It was freezing outside. In fact, the wind chill was -1. But you can see here that my battery temperature is 12 degrees C. That means that if I put the battery on now to charge, I'm still above that 10 degrees C limit. The other thing to know is as a battery is charging, it generates heat. So once we put it on charge, it will retain that temperature. Indeed, I've checked my battery while it's on charge and it's running around about the 17 degrees C. And you can find this battery temperature information in the engineering section of the app. We then have the other extreme, that's high temperatures. And whereas we're being told we mustn't use the bike above 60 degrees C, which there aren't many places where we'd be doing that, I guess. The upper limit for charging is set at between 40 and 45 degrees, depending on whose manual you look at. So let's look at charge time. If we read the instructions, we're told that we ideally shouldn't leave the battery on charge for longer than 5 hours. That's quite surprising because I would have thought something as advanced as this X35 system, for example, would have an automatic charger with some sort of protection to prevent overcharging. Indeed, if you look at the information here from Orbea, they state that the battery charger has a management system that prevents battery damage. But even Orbea are saying that we shouldn't leave on for more than 8 hours. Perhaps we have another example of this belt and braces approach where additional safety margins are being added. But it's important to note that they're stating ideally. Nobody's saying must or should, it's ideally. And as if to reinforce this, if you look at the X35 system instructions for fault finding, you'll see a list of fault codes and their associated remedies. And one of the remedies is actually to leave the battery on charge after it's fully charged for another 2 hours. And this is to equalise the cells. Now that suggests to me, A, it's not going to harm your battery, and it suggests that there's also some form of battery management system in the charger. So I wouldn't worry too much about that personally. But of course, it's always good to charge the battery on off-peak power. It's good for the environment, it's good for our pocket. And that means we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because if we use a simple timer like this one, we can set the battery to come on at 2 o'clock in the morning and just charge for 5 hours, turn itself off. Of course, we don't want to do that if it's in winter and the temperature is lower than 10 degrees C. So that now brings us to the third item on our list, which is storage. I know that some of you will only ride in the summer, or maybe you'll only ride your e-bike in the summer. And in that case, you'll be putting the bike away for a few months at least. Also, even if you're riding your bike all year round, you might have a range extender and you only use that for certain trips, and that's going to be stored. And this is where it's very important that we understand that lithium-ion batteries do not like being stored at full charge. So what we should do is store our lithium-ion batteries at anything below 80%. There are various recommendations between 20% and 60%. Personally, I would store around the 60-70% mark. Now I have to admit that When I first got this bike, I would immediately put it on charge after a ride so that it was ready for my next ride. So I might be storing it for 4 or 5 days at full charge. Now, I don't think that's going to cause any major problems. I wouldn't have thought so. But what I do now is if I come back in, my battery's say 50%, I'll leave it at that. And then I'll pop it on charge the night before I'm due to ride. Now, I don't think a full charge for a few days is going to cause it any problem in any case. One other aspect of this confused me slightly in that we're being told that every 2 months we should fully charge the battery. Now that means that we're going to be storing at full charge, so I don't really understand that. So really, if we're storing long term, we should just keep an eye on the battery. Just pop the system on. You can just go by the charge light on the iWatch system, or you can pop the app on and it'll tell you exactly what your charge state is. And while we're talking about part charges, I think it's worth noting when we're looking at the life of a battery being 500 charge cycles, that can be quite alarming to some people when they work out how much they'll be riding. I know when I first looked at these bikes, I worked out how many times I'd be charging, and I think it only gave me about 3 years use. But of course, what we need to understand is that if we recharge 20%, then we can do that 5 times before we have a full charge. So every time you charge the battery, it's not one of the 500 charges, it's part of it. And I, on average, get around 100 miles for each full charge of the battery. And a useful way to check this is to look at the app under the engineering section again. It'll tell you how many times your bike has been charged and compare that with the mileage that you've ridden. That's going to give you your average per full charge. For those of you not familiar with the X35 system, you could be forgiven for asking why would anyone bother with an internal battery on an e-bike? Well, the answer is quite simple. The bike is around 40% lighter than a standard external battery e-bike, and that means that you can ride the bike easily without power. Add to this the sleek lines. It's an ideal crossover bike from those people that do ride normally but want a little bit of assistance occasionally, and those that want to ride with power all the time. So the distinction's fairly clear. Well, I hope that was useful to you, and I hope it hasn't confused you more than it's answered questions. But if you have any other comments, questions, or indeed if there's something I've got wrong and you want to add to it, or you've got other ways of handling the battery, please comment below. I don't know everything, but I've researched it on your behalf. There'll be much more content coming up. Hopefully we'll get some riding in, even though the weather's changed. So please subscribe if you can, and please like this video if you did like it. Also, we now have a Facebook subscriber chat group, so you can all chat to each other. It might be you're a bit shy about commenting on the channel itself, so if you'd like to, you can join the subscriber chat and have a chat to each other, have a chat to me, and it's quite informal, it's quite good fun, so please, we'd love to see you there. I shall be continuing with my bike build, and I think the next video may well be an update on that. So if you want to follow me building my titanium bike, then again, please subscribe, keep in touch on that. But until next time, I'll say goodbye and safe riding.